Hello and welcome along to Africa's biggest braai. I have the privilege of hosting the On the Whistle podcast. It's been a while, but I'm back like a shark attack. Joining me today is the one and only man with swagger, man who's so suave, man with an intellect the size of Pluto, Mars, the moon, and the earth combined. Franz Nkwain, live from Yaoundé. How are you doing?
Very well. I'm just taken by my brother Courtney's rather illuminating top. Can't wait for you to use him.
Well, listen, a man who has the longevity, the youthfulness of Cristiano Ronaldo. No, he's not being paid lots of money to play in the Saudi Pro League. He does it for free in Essex. Courtney Freese, live from his car. How are you doing, brother?
Zayn, I'm dangerously good as usual. I'm a bit embarrassed because I turned up to training, and as you just said, the man that has everything, I just don't have socks.
You can play barefoot.
Oh, amateurish.
You can borrow some socks off somebody.
It happens. It happens. Well, listen, Courtney, it's so good to be back on the pod with you and Francis. It's been a while. And I'm looking forward to chewing the fat with you guys. But before we move into the main talkers, I just want to tell all of our listeners, viewers, anyone out there who consumes this, social media, YouTube, or on your favorite podcast device, please get in touch with us. Find us at OTW_podcast on X. Notice I don't call it Twitter anymore. You can find us also on Instagram by the same handle. And of course, search for the On the Whistle podcast on YouTube and Facebook. You'll find us there. Let us know what you think. Ask us questions. Give us suggestions. We love to hear from you. Today's show is going to be jam-packed. We've got a number of interesting talkers. We're going to pay tribute to the Ivory Coast Sol Bamba later in the show after he tragically passed away. We also will be getting into talking about at the top of the show who the greatest African is in the Premier League. I know Courtney has an opinion on that. And of course, if you're a Nigerian and you're a Super Eagles fan, you'll want to know about Victor Osimhen's move to Galatasaray. Should he have gone there? Should he have moved from Italian giants Napoli? Should he not have found a home in the Prem? Or is it that the Turkish powerhouse is the right place for him from a playing and financial perspective? But first, let's start off with who we think is the greatest African to have ever graced the Premier League shores. Well, I should say England shores. Courtney, congratulations. Your Liverpool had a fantastic win over Francis's Man United. And I think that's influenced who you think the greatest African to play in the Prem is.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Zayn. Thank you for that tee off. I will say it's an easy discussion. The numbers speak for itself. The numbers also speak for itself in a team that has not been great all the time. And the numbers speak for itself because I feel this is not a player that's also not always been great. This is a player that went through very difficult periods in his life to get to this particular point and be the superstar that he is. That is the one and only unparalleled Mohamed Salah. Now, Mohamed Salah, I think, when we talk about Africans, has to be the exclusive, the numero uno, the number one football talent to come out of Africa and the best to have played in the Premier League. Now, that's a massive shout. You must talk about Didier Drogba, 25 million coming from Marseille. Nobody knew much about him. Mourinho said to Abramovich, you got to go and get that guy. We didn't know what he was going to become. He was calamitous in his first season. He just wasn't the powerhouse he was going. Then he went on to steamroll teams. That is not who Mohamed Salah is. Mohamed Salah came and has been at his peak and has stayed at the peak. And even when Liverpool haven't been at their peak, Mohamed Salah has been at the peak. He is an unbelievable player. Unbelievable player from a goal point of view, from an assist point of view, just and And let's just also throw this in from a role model point of view, which we can't always throw at footballers. We can't throw that in. You know, they're human, they make mistakes, they're vulnerables just like us, vulnerabilities just like us. I think we cannot look past Mohamed Salah now. It's not a conversation anymore. It's not that, oh, you know, someone else was also a good player. Yes, we recognize the other highly talented people. Let's also give some shout outs to Jeremy Lauren, that went to Arsenal. He was a right winger, played right back, and was unbelievable in the Invincible season. Let's go to size 19, Kanu, that got to Arsenal and scored a wonderful goal in the 3-2 victory over Chelsea in monsoon weather from the corner line, put into the top corner. Let's not forget about our both feet. But we are talking about a player that does not know an off button. That's Mohamed Salah, man. If there was no Messi, which there is, I would be even saying he's better than Ronaldo because his numbers are superior to Ronaldo in the Premier League. Superior. I don't know how we look past him, Zayn. I'd like to hear other people's thoughts.
I guess some of the key numbers that I, you know, the time to caveat to maybe bring you in, Francis, is what is it? 18 goal involvements against United, 15 goals across all competitions. And I think he scored in his past 7 games at Old Trafford. I mean, that's pretty intimidating numbers against the Red Devils, particularly in what is meant to be the theatre of dreams. But I think I saw one writer put it, whenever he goes to Old Trafford, it's like Freddy Krueger arriving for the United fans.
Well, I'd like to first of all say thank you very much for making Manchester United the reference point for the Premier League. And to that effect, I then must bow down to the superior quality that is brother Mohamed Salah of Egypt, who I cannot find words to counter the position that brother Courtney has so finely made. If there were a way I would try to get around this, it would be to ask what we meant by the question, the best African in the Premier League. Now, if that were a statistical fact, then we would be saying George Weah, because he's the only African to have won the Ballon d'Or who played in the Premier League. But if we're talking about what a player has done in the Premier League of African extraction, what this gentleman has done over the years consistently is truly mind-blowing. And I think there is no better player that we can celebrate. I have beautiful relationships with many a great African talent, whether it's the phenomenal Emmanuel Adebayor, or it's the talented Samuel Eto'o, or the amazing Didier Drogba. We have had many of our brothers grace our fields in the Premier League. But I think the consistency and the numbers that Mohamed Salah has hit regularly, truly no debate. So I bow my head and tip my hat and say to the Liverpool great, well done.
Well, let me throw a few more stats in the mix here. When you look at goals and assists in Premier League history, this is all time. Alan Shearer sits at the top of that with 324. Wayne Rooney in position number 2 with 308. Frank Lampard 279. Ryan Giggs 272. Harry Kane 260. Andy Cole 260 as well. Thierry Henry 249. And Mohamed Salah at 232. So when we look at players currently active in the Premier League, he is obviously in the top 10. Obviously, Kane currently playing in Bayern Munich. But I have to ask this question. Stats have to be allied to some form of success. 1 Premier League title, 1 Champions League title. Is that now how we define the greatest? When we think of somebody like Bruce Grobbelaar, who played in goals at Liverpool, I would argue by titles, by success, domestically and in Europe. What was it? I think he won 5 league titles and he won the Champions League once. and he played at Liverpool at a period when they were banned from playing in Europe. To me, Grobler, the Zimbabwean, a man who has a very colourful past, but a man who's been on this pod too, he's probably the greatest African to play for Liverpool and arguably the greatest to play in the Premier League. But I think that I always go for outfield players. I have a few others that I think would be better. But Courtney, I'll pose this to you. Is Grobler not greater than Salah, given the success and given the era he played in for the club?
Zayn, this is such a contentious topic because in making my argument, it sounds like I'm downplaying other great players, which I'm not. You know, what Bruce Grobler did at Liverpool as a Rhodesian during that time, and we interviewed him on our podcast, and the struggle he has to come through and the success he had at Liverpool, we don't downplay that. Don't downplay it at all, right? We recognize absolutely everything. For example, the argument that Francis made, the only African with a Ballon d'Or, George Weah. He didn't have a long Premier League career, but he's one of the most successful in terms of awards in the Premier League. But Mohamed Salah came from nowhere, Zayn. Mohamed Salah has come, let's be honest here, he actually came to Liverpool a failed player from Roma. Nobody thought he would hit the numbers that he's hitting. We're looking at the most difficult time to play in English football is now. There has never been a juggernaut like there is currently in Man City. There's never been a team like that, okay? So let's just start there. I remember if you go back in the era, Ferguson used to say you could lose 4 or 5 games and win the Premier League. You can't do that now. Cannot. The Premier League is at its strongest. Is
that why you only won it once?
There we go. He went to Liverpool nowhere near winning anything, Zayn. Nowhere near winning anything. And you only mentioned 2 trophies. You got to add the Club World Cup to it. You got to add the League Cup trophy to it. You got to add the other trophies that were won during his period. He is not just a goal scorer. He is an assist provider. And don't forget, Zayn, some of the 2 people you mentioned, Alan Shearer and Wayne Rooney, those are strikers, Zayn. He's not a striker.
Okay. Now I'm gonna have to butt in here, Zayn.
And can I come in super quick, Francis? Pause that. I do not want to be accused of doing a disservice to Bruce Grobler's record. He had 6 league titles in that domineering Liverpool team in the 80s he played in. So 6 league titles and the European Cup, which we know as the Champions League. Francis, come on in.
Okay. Now, I think this is where I have to say, Brother Courtney has done a disservice to his beautiful argument he made before. Now, you're bringing up elements that will make me then have to highlight to you that based on the facts that you've raised, then a player like Yaya Toure, then technically Mohamed Salah can't lace his boots. I was giving it to you because of the argument that you made in terms of the stats, the consistency and all of that. If it's about the wins and the victories combined with contributions to your team and carrying a team that came from nowhere, then that's where Yaya Toure comes in. And if that were the argument, or those were the things that we were looking at, then for all the beautiful goals that Mohamed Salah has scored for Liverpool, they haven't exactly won much. But Yaya did that at City, and with that, he also came and marked the beginning of their successful phase and gave them, was it 8 years or 9 years of top quality service? And his stats, right up there. Also, not a striker. Yeah. Technically a defensive midfielder.
Yeah.
Who has stats.
And I'm going to throw in a few other names and a few other stats just to pepper this discussion because I'm loving it. And if you're listening out there and you're loving this, join the discussion, join the debate. OTW_podcast. Sorry, OTW_podcast at X and at Instagram, and join us on our Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, post a comment now. Remember, search for us, On the Whistle Podcast. But here, Courtney, listen to this. Let me throw some stats at you. Let me throw some names at you. Let me make an argument. I'm going to say, like Francis, that I think Yaya, completely underrated. If I am picking an African 11, Yaya is one of the first names I put in there. I have to put Yaya in there. Why do I have to put Yaya in there? Because Yaya's record with Barcelona, and when he came to England with Man City is impeccable. He won the league title 3 times. 3 times. Let me give you another name. The man that is Didier Drogba. I don't care what anybody says. We all know who dragged that Chelsea team through a competition when they changed managers, who dragged that team with so many players missing in the final to that title. It was Didier Drogba against Bayern Munich in the Allianz Arena. Married to that, the statistics of 1, 2, 3, 4 league titles at Chelsea during their era of dominance. Marry that to that. It's a hard argument. And I'm going to throw in one more. Because I don't think this guy gets the credit.
Please throw in Sadio Mane.
I don't think it's a
no,
hard...
no, wait, not Mane yet.
I don't think it's
you guys won't even think of this name. Riyad Mahrez.
Mahrez,
The
yes.
man, we talk about Vardy. We love Kante. But Riyad Mahrez is the one who was the creative wizardry for Leicester. He was the creator. Those legs did amazing things. And he backed it up when he went to City. He won how many league titles? How many league titles this man won?
Four.
At Leicester, he took 1. And then he built on that City going 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 league titles and a Champions League and part of a treble winning team. And we don't think to mention him. I'm not sure Mohamed Salah is even the greatest North African in this competition.
Well, Zayn, listen, when I started my discussion on why I made references to other players as well. We're only talking about big hitters here. Listen, nobody can forget Yaya Toure. But in saying Yaya Toure and saying Mahrez, we're forgetting somebody else as well. I don't disrespect that. And I'm also not talking about trophies here. So I'm not talking about equaling trophies to great success and being the best. I'm not talking about that. Because if we were talking about that, you'd be saying Paul Scholes was a better midfielder than Steven Gerrard. He was never.
Paul Scholes was a better midfielder than Steven Gerrard.
Oh,
no,
please,
Scholes was better. I'm sorry. Zidane said that the best player he ever played against was Paul Scholes.
You know what the argument? You know what deletes the argument?
How many Premier Leagues Gerrard won? And I'm not even a United fan. You're making me sound like a United fan here, and I'm not.
Why did Alex Ferguson try to sign him when he had Paul Scholes? What did
to
he
complement Paul Scholes, not to replace him.
Yeah, no, well, you don't need him.
You need him to come and take over from Keane, not to replace Scholesy. Scholesy is the best footballer of his generation. There are 10 coaches who can tell you that.
We are not talking trophies. We are talking individual output.
But Courtney, can I ask you this question respectfully? Courtney, you know, you're one of my heroes. You know why you're one of my heroes? Because I supported Manning Rangers. And Manning Rangers did a Leicester before Leicester, right? Now, Courtney, if you weren't at that club, you weren't say again?
People don't know that, Zayn.
But I'm saying, if you never won the Premier League, the Premier Soccer League, you'd just be another player. The fact that you won it makes you a hero. And this is what I'm getting at. Mohamed Salah winning those competitions underlies the greatness and backs up the stats that he had. Did he quite have the supporting cast that Yaya might have had at City, that Didier had at Chelsea? Yeah, I can accept those arguments. But I would say the hinge on Liverpool's success turns when Virgil van Dijk joins that team. That's really when the hinge turns in favor. Not undermining Salah, not undermining Alisson, not undermining Mane.
Well, and I think that you're straightening my point. I'm not undermining the other guys that have gone before Salah. I'm not undermining George Weah. I'm not undermining Yaya Toure. I'm not undermining Lauren that no one
played at the same time with him.
That's an invincible. Lauren is an invincible, but went as a right wing to Arsenal and they made him a right back. Not underlining Jeremy when he was at Chelsea before big hitters came. I'm not undermining any of those. But I am saying Mohamed Salah is basically as close to Messi as we can get at this point in time.
Okay, Zayn, with your permission, I'm going to say what I said at the very beginning. I want to align myself with Brother Courtney. I understand where it's coming from. I understand the badge affinity, and I have belief in some of the stuff that he's saying. And I agree. I just feel in his second hit, he pushed his boat out a little bit too far. So call it back in, because if you keep doing that, I'll remind you that I think Mane was even a better player for Liverpool than Salah. And I can show you the stats for that. Because in his absence, you still haven't won anything. You still got Salah.
In whose absence?
Since Mane
Sadio
left,
Mane.
have you won something?
You know, we won a trophy.
Have you won? I say, where, my brother? We were talking about the league now. We said in the Premier League.
No,
have you won the league?
Won anything? So, you know, I'm just being factual here.
Fine.
Right.
That's fair point. Fair point from Courtney.
I give it to you.
But
I tip the hat once more down my head.
I don't want to. Sadio Mane was an unbelievable player, man. Mo Salah's success is based on Sadio Mane and Firmino and everybody else's efforts as well. I don't want to disrespect it. To be honest, having this conversation, sometimes highlighting one person sounds like you're disrespecting others. I'm not doing that. Please. Absolutely. And, you know, I love the fact when you spoke about Yaya Toure, because there's a player I feel like gets almost no valuation and no respect.
100%.
But not from us.
He drags from being nobody to somebody. So City weren't a big hitter, and he went there and made them a massive hitter. So, yeah. And
he still never got a trophy.
Yes, and when I talk about Mohamed Salah, I don't talk about him because he's a Liverpool player. Forget that. You know, if you have to ask me who's my favorite player in Premier League history, it's not even a Liverpool player. So I'm admiring quality. Mohamed Salah is a
listen. I love this discussion, and I just want the listeners and viewers out there, leave comments down. Tell us who you think the greatest is. We will read them out next week. We've presented our cases. We've put them forward. And Courtney, you've presented a good one, but we found some holes. Let's move on to our next talker for the day. And this is Victor Osimhen, the star striker from the Super Eagles and Napoli, has moved to Galatasaray. There's been a lot of talk about where he will move. Let's go to you, Courtney, first. What is your perspective on his move to Turkey?
Firstly, I think the move to Turkey is one of two that could only happen because of the late closures of the windows. So let's start. There were no other options besides going to Saudi or going to Turkey. That's where I feel. The sad thing is that the devastating news for us is that someone of that quality is not playing in the Premier League. You know, he deserved to come in and showcase.
And why do you think that is?
Now, Francis, I think he outpriced himself in terms of wages, if I'm being very honest. Absolutely outpriced himself in terms of wages. Okay. Yes, there's people that like big wages. Ivan Toney's ran to Saudi for massive amount of money. He could have stayed in the Premier League. He's young enough. But I think the money that Osimhen was asking for.
And you know this money how?
Well, I can only make these conversations based on social media figures.
But with the greatest respect, Francis, there were a lot of figures bandied out by very respected,
that's what I'm asking, by whom?
Very respected journalists who are
okay. All right. So let me ask you. We
never know for sure with these things.
Right. No, let's forget about that.
That's
so
what
when we talk money. Okay, allow me. So let me say, if we're talking money and you lay the money claim at the door of the player, why aren't we talking about what De Laurentiis was asking for? If a club is saying we will only sell a player for 100, his buyout clause was 123 million euros.
Sorry, who was that, Francis?
His club.
The owner of Napoli, De Laurentiis.
When he had the issue with the racism where his own club posted things wrong, all that kind of malarkey, and they agreed and said, okay, we might have to let you go. You've agreed that you're not. And they say, okay, cool. What we're going to do is we're going to increase your wages. We'll keep you, but for us to make our profit, for this to work out for us, we're going to do your buyout clause then at 123 million euros or whatever that was set at. And then they offer him a bigger package wage. They offered him that, right? He signs, knowing fully well that he can leave. But at this time, he's still there with Spalletti. Spalletti leaves, right? After they win the Scudetto, Spalletti leaves. And it's like, okay, he's gone. And then they said, but we still need to get rid of you. Nobody's willing to meet that package. So they say the whole package can be expensive if you don't drop your wages. But if a guy has a 3-year contract at a place and you're going to pay him that money regardless, and nobody else is offering, that money can be reduced by you reducing how much you're asking for him. Even when the Saudis came along and they said they would pay, I believe it was 60, they had agreed finally with, he increased it back up to 85 just before. And that's when they were like, you know, but we can go and get Ivan Toney for 40. Nobody complained about his wages from the club side of affairs. The question was, if you do the outlay to buy the player and you have to pay those wages, that's where you have an issue. Right now, Napoli, he's still on the same wages. It hasn't changed. He's got a year loan for no fee to go to Galatasaray. Napoli are still going to meet the shortfall of his wages, so the wages stay the same for the lad. His contract is the same. The clubs were not complaining about his salary, yet somehow that's what was framed, and that's what I took exception to. Because the conversation rested in a place where, as a buyout clause was inserted into this young man's contract, he's a 25-year-old. At 24, they came along and they said, you know what? At the time when he said, I can't deal with this club anymore because in spite of the fact that I just helped you guys win your first Scudetto in 33 years, since Diego Maradona banged in 31 goals in a season. Then he has an injury. Even with the injury-raffled season, he still scores, I believe it was 17, 18 goals in that season. And yet all of a sudden the conversation begins about he's not really top quality. Okay, cool. That's your opinion. That's cool. But if he's not, shouldn't the club then agree that, okay, maybe the buyout they put is not going to work in the marketplace? Then it becomes his responsibility for him to go. Okay.
And what do you do when Conte is saying, I ain't going to pick
Yes,
you?
Conte says, I don't want you. You're not his player. And we know how Conte works. So the boss man of the club says, okay, I line up with my coach. We have a new project. It's not the player's responsibility to go and find. He has a binding contract. You pay him his salary. You stick him with the kids, no problem. And then all of a sudden, we're having to go with the guy himself and say, like, if it was you in your office, you do the same thing. I wanted out. You convinced me to stay because you said, here's more money for you. But what we'll do is we'll make our money back up when we sell you to somebody else, as long as you keep delivering. He does his part. He's still, even in the Ballon d'Or, I think he came 8th or 7th or 8th. He's still the African Player of the Year. He's still like, this club paid 73 million for him, Napoli, in 2020. He has improved from scoring 10 goals in his first season to 17 goals in his second season to 31 goals in the next to, I believe it was 17 or 18 in the injury. All right. So all in all, he's still banged in nearly 80 goals for you over 40. How does that make him a crap player? But the other clubs are saying the money you're asking for is too much. We must learn also to point fingers where the fingers should be pointed. But the friends in that space change the conversation when we start talking about the players' wages. His wages aren't really an issue. Galatasaray are able to absorb that and say, okay, cool, we'll play 3/4 of his wages and that's all right, or 2/3 of his wages, and they meet the little shortfall. Wages will never be an issue because there are ways in which you can weight it. The money sounds a lot to us. At the end of the day, his basic wage comes up to about 10 million euros a year. That's what he's on at Napoli. They were asking for the same. If you give a person 9 million, you think he's really gonna make that much of a difference in his life, or you offer him 11? The question is, for those guys who are coming to buy, they're saying, if I need to make an outlay of 120 before you come, nobody's paying that kind of money anymore. That's where the conversation stalled. And rather than own up to that, even how much did they buy his replacement for from Chelsea? Even Chelsea started off by saying, we won't let Lukaku go if we're not receiving about 70 million for him. And then they got realistic. He was out the door for something like 35 million pounds in the end, right? So everybody was, all right, that's where the real issue is. We saw United City not even going into the marketplace properly because everybody's looking at the numbers. It's the numbers for the big purchase outlay. And that's why I say De Laurentiis, the boss at Napoli, they came up short in that space. And if they turn around and say it's his fault, it's still your bill. You keep paying him because you send him to the kids. If you're running a proper club, he could have gone. He could have said, I'll sit here for 6 months and you pay me. And that's understood. They would still have to pay his wages, but the lad still wants to play. So he goes to the club where his favorite player, Didier Drogba, used to play. Galatasaray put their hands up and said, we can have you over here. That's still a big club, a Champions League club. In present day football, bigger stature than Napoli in modern day football. Napoli has history. So until what Osimhen did with them under Spalletti, for them to come and win the Scudetto, trophy for trophy in the last 10, 15, 20 years, Galatasaray next to Napoli, it's chalk and cheese. So he still stepped up. And somehow we're being told that there's something wrong and it's him and the people around him. And yes, maybe they were gunning for a bigger move or something, but the reservation, I can guarantee you, the reservation at the Chelsea or the reservation at any of the Premier League clubs that were considering him would not have been around his wages. It would definitely have been around. Chelsea still took Sancho from Manchester United. So wages is never a problem. And yet somehow in the tabloidy space, in the tabloidy press, we are made to look at the players and then we point fingers over there because they're incompetent people who are running the business side of businesses that they don't really know what they're doing with.
The logic you've presented makes sense, Francis. Definitely the logic you present makes sense. My concern is a 25-year-old who I would like to be seen playing in one of the top 5 leagues isn't here. And I think I got excited with the talk of he could go to PSG or he could go to Chelsea. And it would have been fun to see him in that space. And maybe I'm doing a disservice to Galatasaray because, like you say, there's history. We saw what a welcome they gave him on arrival at the airport, those fans. So, you know, they're a huge European powerhouse.
A huge
following
with money,
and they've had great names.
Afford to have him there.
But I hope that this is a fantastic step on his journey to getting into one of getting back into one of the big 5 leagues.
But the responsibility cannot be his. That's the point I'm just
no,
that's
what I'm saying. I get it. You're on the money.
Sometimes to be able to look at the facts and then look at the lay of the land and say, okay, in all fairness, Chelsea, I just gave you the example of a Sancho coming into them. Was not afraid of wages. Yes, there are some wages that they might look at and they might go like, oh, but he wasn't going anywhere and saying to somebody like, if you're not dropping me the kind of money I get in Saudi Arabia, I'm not coming to you. He's a player who's built for the Premier League. But 100%. I guarantee you at the end of the day, even in the negotiation for him to go to Galatasaray, if you go and find out, there was a talk about the fact that they have also asked to renegotiate the buyout clause. So it maintains its value because they intend on recouping the money that they think they need to make on him. So he's not the block. But he can go to Galatasaray and maybe in January, somebody is really having a tough time and they still say, come, he's still in the European space. He'll be playing Champions League football anyway. So, all right, you've not gone to the far reaches of the world and you're out of sight and out of mind. Yeah, he's still playing in a space, in a league that we can kind of like still respect. So he's doing a decent job where he is. He can probably still come into the Premier League from that. But I think, in my humble opinion, the reality check must be deposited at the account of the club itself. They must be able to say, you know what, if somebody were to take this guy off our books, we can't also ask them upfront to drop us 80 million. This current climate, nobody's paying that money anymore. Nobody. Look at João Felix, who was coming to João Felix was valued at the same kind of rates, 120 million not so long ago. He came in on a loan fee of like 20 million for a season. That's not happening anymore because people running these clubs are looking at it and still going, okay, even if I were to pay you something reasonable, I'm going to space it out. They were talking about upfront money. So all those conversations that never materialized was because they weren't talking with the player. They're talking with the club first. you find out, first of all, if you have something that you can do, because if all you need to talk about with the player is wages, then think about it. A 4-year contract with a player at 10 million euros a year on wages is 40 million over 4 years for any club, even Southampton, if they have to and they can afford it. But now it's when you add to that maybe an 80 million upfront payment before you start paying these wages, that you say, hold up a second, all in all, that's 120. But who's getting the bulk? The club. And yet somehow we're talking about the player.
No, again, points well made. I think it's a good point to move it off as we wind the pot up. But Francis, another story that was on our radar and something that just left us all feeling a little heartened when the news came through was the recent passing of Sol Bamba. He passed away in Turkey, where he's working with Adanaspor as a technical director. For a generation that might not have known the great Ivorian centre back, what type of player was he, Francis, and how will he be missed?
Before we even talk about the player, you have to talk about the man. He was like one of these really good human beings. His coach, Neil Warnock, described him as the ever smiling player who gave him to go into training, and like he was just one of those characters, really just humble, appreciated the blessing of the career path he had. Anytime you had the good fortune of speaking with him, he would constantly remind you of just how not so hard the work he does is, and how blessed they are to be able to do what they do and earn what they earn and bring joy to people on Saturdays. I remember distinctively when he joined Cardiff. We had been doing some work with Cardiff for some years prior to that, and I think he had been his contract was cancelled at his former club, or he was out of contract that summer, and Neil Warnock was looking for a job or something, and I believe he simply said to the lad, like, wherever I go, I'll bring you. And this guy waited impatiently, of course, because it was, I think the story goes, Neil was sure it wouldn't take him more than a couple of weeks or 3 weeks to get a job. But we got to the season began or something. It was even like September or something before he got in at Cardiff. But he kept his word and he brought him along with him. And in that season, he helped. I think they got promoted that season, and then they had a fantastic season in the Premier League. But just genuinely a good lad. He had suffered from cancer, recovered just, I think it was in like 2022 or something, or 21, that he got his all clear, and we were also happy, for him, and then he even when he retired from football, one of the last things he did was score a penalty against Manchester United in the FA Cup at Old Trafford. I can remember that much. I think he was at Middlesbrough at the time. And then he retired and he joined the staff at Cardiff again as assistant coach there, under the French dude who was there for, what was his name again? I can't even remember his name.
I can't remember, if I'm very honest.
Yeah, Lamouche. No, I can't remember his name. He joined him, and he was assistant coach with him, and that was because the fans, like, they needed somebody who could connect the management with the fans. And in his time at Cardiff, he had been so emblematic that the fans, they knew having a character like him on the bench would reconnect the management staff with the supporters. That's the kind of man he was. And it's weird speaking about him in past tense. But yeah, and then he left there, and when the coach was fired, again he showed such loyalty, and he was offered the job to stay on, but he moved away with the coach when the coach was fired, and then he got this job out in Turkey, and was doing a fantastic job there. And I think it's a real sad loss on a human level, and that's where I would want to really remember him, and and keep him in our minds.
Yeah.
The player was a decent, dependable player.
Yeah.
But the human being was exceptional.
Yeah, and I think you've hit it on the head. And it was interesting when you look at his statistics. He was part of that great Ivorian team that finished as runners-up in the Ivory Coast, for the Ivory Coast in the AFCON, if I'm correct, losing to Chipolopolo in that final, the Zambians. And then I think similarly was a runner-up in the EFL Cup, so the League Cup. So again, lots of fantastic consistency on the field, even though the silverware might not have come like it has for other players, but a fantastic human being to celebrate and pay tribute. So thank you for that, Francis. Francis, before we go, I know that we've got the AFCON qualifiers on the go. There are loads of games taking place. Today, when we are recording on Wednesday, Sudan securing an important win over Niger. They won with a solitary goal, a second half strike from Abu Bakr at the Juba Stadium. It's enough to get them a very solid and good victory, considering Sudan on Group F, along with African football heavyweights, Ghana and Angola. Tell me, Francis, when you look at the fixtures this week, what is the one that maybe stands out to you? Which of the AFCON qualifiers is the one that you think people should be tuning into?
Well, my patriotic hat would say Cameroon v Namibia, but we still don't know where that game will be taking place, so I'll leave that on the side with all its challenges. But the game I'm really interested in watching is the Mali-Mozambique game, and it has a lot of jeopardy around it when you look at the Malian team. They have some off-field issues with, I believe, up to like 10 players who refused to call up because of the position the federation took with their captain. So you have like quite a good number of players who refused to report present for the camp. But what I find most exciting is the return of Tom Saintfiet as manager in Mali. When I say return, it's not a return to Mali, but a return to African football. He had gone off to the Philippines, I think it was, but he's managed Namibia, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Togo, but most recently Gambia. And what he did with Gambian football for me was truly exciting. I know he was one of those foreign coaches that even Cameroon had considered, and Ghana considered him coming in into their structure. I think the one thing I do admire and like about him is his willingness to contextualize. He comes across as somebody who's very respectful of the space. And I think that has been at the heart of his success. We have all seen these other foreign coaches, European coaches who come into the space and almost want to pontificate all the time. There is something about our local structures that leave a lot to be desired, but there's a way in which you can work with them and find success. And he comes across to me as one of those managers who does that so well. And it would be interesting to see, given the current political status of Mali, how a person like him works within this new political structure and what that could speak for the future of coaching, management on the African continent. So that's why this fixture for me is particularly exciting.
It's worth pointing out that Tom has been on our podcast before. So nothing on our podcast is ever old. It's only vintage or retro. So if you search for Tom Saintfiet on the Whistle podcast, please go back in the archive. If you want to learn a little bit more about him, his passions, his coaching, tune in to that. Francis, as always, it's a pleasure doing the pod with you. But before we go, we're going to hit the mailbag to hear what some of our loyal viewers and listeners think. We had two really good comments on two different pieces of content. One was the interview with Fani Madida, the South African footballing legend. And we have a comment from Obi-Wan Bolo Bolo, and I have a feeling that this isn't his real name, Francis. So I'm going to read his comment and you'll hear why I think that. And he went, Medina was actually a footballer of today, but unfortunately there was no foresight in Turkey at the time to realize it. Even though he played for a short time at Besiktas, his place in my memory is very strong. I can never forget his running on his tiptoes, his dribbling, and his unique goal kicks. Bow to Fani Medina, a true legend. May the force be with you. That perhaps is the giveaway. And then we had Brent Mermans, and he listened to the podcast that Courtney had done with Hans Funk, the South African goalkeeper of Dutch descent. And his comment was a lot shorter, but still impactful. And he said, Hans, the best keeper the world has ever had. I'm sure that's a great place to leave our pod. We certainly have discussed who the greatest African is in the Premier League and had lots of opinions. And I'm sure in Africa and the world, we'll have that with the goalkeepers. Francis, it's always a pleasure doing business with you. Lovely to have you on the pod and can't wait to see you around the braai soon.
Pleasure was mine, Brother Zayn.